Faith Mensah had only one piece of bread left, yet she placed it into the trembling hands of an old beggar woman everyone else had chased away. The woman looked into Faith's eyes, whispered, "One day you'll know who I really am," then disappeared into the crowded streets of Accra. Moments later, a convoy of black luxury SUVs stormed into the market, their frantic occupants searching for the missing woman. They were too late. Faith walked away, believing she had simply helped another forgotten stranger, never imagining that the woman was not only Africa's hidden billionaire, but the mother who had been searching for her own stolen daughter for over 20 years. Have you ever watched from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, or somewhere else in the world? Tell us your country and your local time in the comments. We'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy powerful stories about hope, family, and unexpected justice, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next journey. The first light of dawn spilled gently across the crowded streets of Accra, but for Faith Mensah, mornings were never peaceful. Before the city awakened, before office workers hurried toward glass buildings and vendors arranged colorful fruits along the roadside, Faith was already sweeping the front entrance of a small neighborhood bakery. The owner allowed her to work for 2 hours every morning in exchange for a modest wage and whatever bread remained unsold from the previous day. It was never much. Sometimes she received 3 loaves, sometimes only 1. And on difficult mornings, she received nothing but a quiet apology. Faith never complained. At 22 years old, she had learned that life rarely rewarded complaints. It rewarded persistence. Every coin she earned mattered. Every meal mattered. Every opportunity mattered. She folded the worn sleeves of her faded blue shirt and continued sweeping as customers gradually filled the sidewalk. The bakery owner, Mr. Boadu, stepped outside carrying a small paper bag. "You worked hard today." Faith smiled warmly. "Thank you, sir." He handed her the bag. "Only 2 rolls today. Business hasn't been good." Faith accepted it with both hands. "I'm grateful." She truly was. The 2 bread rolls would become breakfast, lunch, or perhaps dinner if she could stretch them long enough. After finishing her work, she carefully placed the paper bag inside her old backpack before beginning the long walk toward another job across the city. Faith never owned a motorcycle. She never rode taxis. Every destination meant walking. The journey itself often lasted longer than the work waiting for her. As she crossed one busy intersection after another, familiar faces greeted her. An elderly fruit seller waved. "Good morning, my daughter." Faith smiled. "Morning, Mama Efua." A young newspaper vendor lifted his hand. "Morning, Faith." She greeted everyone with the same gentle warmth that had somehow survived years of loneliness. People noticed. Many wondered how someone who possessed so little could still smile so easily. Few understood the answer. Faith had spent her childhood inside Hope Children's Home on the edge of Accra. She remembered almost nothing before arriving there. No parents, no family photographs, no birthday celebrations, only a faded hospital blanket that had accompanied her as an infant. The orphanage director had once told her she had been found outside a small church wrapped inside that blanket, with no letter, no name, and no explanation. The name Faith had been chosen because one of the caregivers believed that only faith could carry a child through such an uncertain beginning. The surname Mensah had been given simply because it was common in Ghana. It belonged to no known family. At least, that was what everyone believed. Growing up inside the orphanage taught Faith many lessons. She learned how to share. She learned how to comfort younger children when they cried at night. She learned that birthdays often passed unnoticed. She learned not to expect visitors. Most painful of all, she learned not to wait by the gate, hoping someone would return for her. Many children waited. Some waited for years. Eventually, they stopped. Faith stopped waiting when she was 12. Instead, She focused on becoming someone kind enough that even without a family, she could still make someone else's life easier. That promise had quietly guided every decision she made since. By midday, the sun hung heavily above Accra. Faith had finished washing dishes at a roadside restaurant and earned enough money to buy a bottle of water. She sat beneath a large neem tree, opened the paper bag from the bakery, and looked at the 2 bread rolls. One would be enough. The other she could save. Or perhaps, she smiled to herself, someone else might need it more. It was a habit she could never break. As she stood to continue walking toward her afternoon cleaning job, she noticed a familiar figure sitting alone beside the market entrance, the elderly woman. The same woman she had fed the previous afternoon. Mama Ajua. Her gray dress looked even more worn than before. Dust covered her bare feet. She stared blankly at the ground, while hundreds of people passed without looking at her. Some avoided her. Others laughed quietly. A few children pointed before their parents pulled them away. Faith approached slowly. "Good afternoon." The old woman looked up. For several seconds, confusion filled her eyes. Then recognition softened her face. "You came back." Faith smiled. "I said I would." She sat beside her on the low concrete step. Without hesitation, she removed one bread roll from the paper bag and handed it over. Mama Ajua stared at it instead of taking it. "This is yours." Faith nodded. "We can share." The woman accepted it with trembling hands. "You don't even know me." Faith shrugged gently. "I don't have to know someone before choosing kindness." The old woman's eyes glistened. No one had spoken to her like that in years. They ate quietly together while the busy market continued around them. After a few moments, Faith noticed the woman's persistent cough. It sounded deep, painful, almost constant. "Have you seen a doctor recently?" Mama Ajua shook her head. "I don't remember." "Do you have any medicine?" Another slow shake of the head. Faith lowered her eyes. She reached into her pocket. Inside were the few crumpled SETI notes she had earned that morning. They were supposed to pay part of next week's rent. Without rent, her landlord would almost certainly force her to leave. She counted the money twice, then looked back at the old woman. "You need a clinic." Mama Ajua looked surprised. "I have no money." Faith smiled. "Neither do I." The old woman laughed softly for the first time. It was a tired laugh. "But we'll find a way." An hour later, they arrived at a small community clinic. The waiting room was crowded. Patients filled every chair. Faith patiently supported Mama Ajua while they waited. When their turn finally came, the nurse behind the desk glanced at the elderly woman's torn clothing before looking at Faith. "Consultation fee first." Faith quietly placed nearly every coin she owned onto the counter. The nurse counted them. "It isn't enough." Faith swallowed. "This is everything I have." The nurse sighed. "I'm sorry." Faith remained silent. Before she could respond, an older doctor walking through the hallway overheard the conversation. He stopped. "What seems to be the problem?" the nurse explained. The doctor looked at Faith. "You paid everything." She nodded. "It's all I have." "And she's your mother?" Faith hesitated, then answered honestly. "No." The doctor seemed surprised. "Your grandmother?" "No." "A relative," Faith smiled gently. "Just someone who shouldn't be sick alone." The doctor studied her face for a long moment. Finally, he smiled. "Bring her inside." The examination revealed exhaustion, dehydration, and untreated high blood pressure. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but left untreated it easily could become dangerous. The doctor handed Faith a prescription. "I've arranged for the consultation to be free." Faith's eyes widened. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me." He glanced toward Mama Adjoa. People like you remind the rest of us what kindness looks like. As they left the clinic, Faith carefully held the small paper bag containing the medicine. She knew she now had almost nothing left. No savings, very little food, only enough money to get through another day if everything went perfectly. Yet, strangely, she felt lighter. Mama Adjoa suddenly stopped walking. She looked directly at Faith with unusual clarity. For just a brief moment, the confusion disappeared from her face. Her voice became calm, strong, almost elegant. "You have your mother's heart." Faith smiled sadly. "I wish I knew her." Mama Adjoa slowly reached toward Faith's face, gently touching her cheek as tears formed in her own eyes. "So do I." The words escaped almost like a forgotten memory. Then the confusion returned. She looked around nervously, no longer understanding where she was. Faith quietly took her hand again. "It's all right." Neither of them realized that across the street, inside a dark SUV parked beneath the shade of an old acacia tree, a man wearing sunglasses had been watching them for nearly 20 minutes. He lowered his phone after secretly taking several photographs. His expression grew cold. He immediately dialed a number. "I've found her." A brief silence followed. Then he added in a low voice, "And she's living with a young woman named Faith Mensah." Faith Mensah barely slept that night. The medicine the doctor had prescribed eased Mama Adjoa's coughing, but the elderly woman woke several times in confusion, unable to remember where she was. Each time Faith gently reassured her, offered her water, and waited until she drifted back to sleep. The room they occupied was hardly large enough for one person. A rusted metal bed stood against one wall. A thin mattress lay on the floor. A cracked wooden table served as both a dining table and a study desk. The tiny window overlooked a narrow alley where stray cats searched through rubbish bins every night. Faith quietly spread her only blanket over Mama Adjoa before sitting beside the window. She watched the moonlight spill across the rooftops. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. That thought should have comforted her. Instead, it filled her with worry. She had no idea how she would feed another person tomorrow. She had no savings. Her rent was due in less than a week. The little money she had earned that day was already gone. Still, every time she looked toward the sleeping old woman, she felt she had made the right decision. "No one deserves to face illness alone," she whispered to herself. The next morning began before sunrise. Faith carefully prepared warm porridge using the last handful of maize flour she had stored in a small container. When she placed the bowl in front of Mama Adjoa, the elderly woman stared at it in silence. "Eat while it's warm," Faith said with a smile. Mama Adjoa hesitated. "What about you?" "I already ate." It was a lie. Mama Adjoa slowly pushed the bowl back. "No." Faith looked surprised. "We'll share." The old woman broke into a faint smile. "You always share." Faith laughed softly. "I suppose I do." They divided the simple breakfast into 2 small portions. Neither of them ate enough to feel full. Neither complained. After breakfast, Faith prepared to leave for work. She paused at the doorway. "I'll be back before sunset." Mama Adjoa looked around the tiny room with uncertainty. "What if I forget?" Faith walked back and gently squeezed her hand. "You don't have to remember everything." She smiled warmly. "Just remember that someone is coming back for you." The old woman's eyes became moist. She nodded slowly. "I'll try." Faith hurried toward the wealthy neighborhood where she worked as a cleaner 3 afternoons each week. The large white house belonged to the Addo family, who had always treated her fairly. Mrs. Addo greeted her at the gate. "You look tired today." Faith smiled politely. "I didn't sleep much." "Are you all right?" "I've been looking after an elderly woman. Mrs. Addo raised an eyebrow. A relative. No. The older woman laughed gently. I should have known. Faith looked confused. Mrs. Addo smiled knowingly. You've always collected people who needed kindness. Faith lowered her eyes modestly. I couldn't leave her on the street. Mrs. Addo placed a hand on Faith's shoulder. The world needs more people who think that way. For the next several hours, Faith cleaned windows, washed floors, dusted furniture, and organized bookshelves. She worked with quiet concentration. Mrs. Addo watched her from time to time. Faith had worked there for almost 2 years. She had never arrived late, never argued, never asked for advances on her wages, never taken anything that wasn't hers. Trust like that was difficult to find. When the work was finished, Mrs. Addo handed her the usual payment. Then she added another small envelope. What's this? A little bonus. Faith immediately shook her head. You don't have to. I know, Mrs. Addo smiled. But perhaps your elderly friend needs proper food. Faith hesitated. I can't accept charity. It isn't charity. Mrs. Addo gently closed Faith's fingers around the envelope. It's gratitude. Faith's eyes filled with emotion. Thank you. Before leaving, she stopped at a small grocery shop. She carefully compared prices. Rice, beans, cooking oil, fresh vegetables, a small packet of tea. She calculated every coin. By the time she reached her room, the sun was beginning to disappear behind the buildings. She pushed open the door. Mama Adjoa. No answer. Faith's heart skipped. The mattress was empty. The room was silent. She quickly placed the groceries down and rushed outside. Her eyes searched the narrow street. Nothing. She ran toward the nearby market, then toward the clinic, then the public water tap. Finally, nearly 20 minutes later, she found the old woman sitting beneath a large mango tree at the end of the road. Mama Adjoa looked frightened. I couldn't remember which way home was. Faith knelt beside her. You don't ever have to be afraid. I'm sorry. You've done nothing wrong. Faith helped her stand. As they slowly walked back together, Mama Adjoa suddenly stopped beside a jewelry shop. She stared through the glass window. Her expression changed completely. Elegant diamond necklaces sparkled beneath bright lights. Employees moved carefully around expensive displays. The old woman's breathing became uneven. She pressed a hand against her forehead. I've been here before. Faith looked surprised. You remember? Mama Adjoa closed her eyes tightly. There was a meeting. Faith waited quietly. People were standing. The elderly woman's voice became stronger. They called me. She frowned. They called me. Before the memory could return completely, a sharp pain shot through her head. She staggered. Faith immediately caught her. It's all right. The old woman looked around in confusion once again. Where are we? Faith forced a reassuring smile. Just walking home. She didn't mention what had just happened, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. A meeting. Inside an expensive jewelry store, the words didn't match the appearance of a homeless woman living on the streets. That evening, while they prepared dinner together, Faith noticed something else. Mama Adjoa instinctively folded the tablecloth with remarkable precision. She arranged the plates perfectly. She even corrected the way Faith held a fork. You should place it on the left. Faith laughed. How do you know that? The old woman blinked. I don't know. She looked genuinely confused. It just feels familiar. Faith watched her carefully. There were moments when Mama Adjoa behaved like someone who had received an elite education. Moments later, she struggled to remember where she was. The contrast puzzled her. Across the city, on the top floor of the gleaming headquarters of Mensah Holdings, another conversation was taking place. The office overlooked much of Accra. Luxury cars filled the private parking area below. Inside, Kwesi Owusu stood beside the enormous windows, while a man in a dark suit entered carrying a tablet. "I followed them all day." Kwesi turned. "And—" The investigator displayed several photographs. Faith helping Mama Ajua walk. Faith buying medicine. Faith searching the streets after Mama Ajua wandered away. Faith supporting the old woman home. Kwesi examined each picture in silence. "So," he finally spoke, "she's still alive?" "Yes, sir." "And the girl?" "Her name is Faith Mensah." Kwesi narrowed his eyes. Background: 22 years old, raised in Hope Children's Home. No known parents. No criminal record. Works multiple low-paying jobs. The investigator paused before continuing. "Everyone describes her the same way." Kwesi looked up. "How? Honest. Kind. Impossible to corrupt." Kwesi's expression hardened. "Everyone has a weakness." "It doesn't appear so." Kwesi slowly placed the tablet on his desk. "You don't understand." He stared once more at the photographs of Mama Ajua. "If Ajua Mensah remembers who she is," his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "everything I've built over the last 22 years disappears." The investigator remained silent. Kwesi picked up one photograph. Faith was smiling while helping Mama Ajua climb a small step. He studied the young woman's face. Then he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man beginning to form a plan. If the old woman trusts Faith— He slowly folded the photograph. "Then perhaps Faith is exactly the person we need to destroy first." The following morning arrived with a cool breeze that drifted through the narrow alley outside Faith Mensah's rented room. It was one of those rare mornings when the air felt fresh before the blazing Ghanaian sun claimed the sky. Faith woke before dawn as usual. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot everything that had happened over the past 2 days. Then she heard a gentle humming. She turned toward the corner of the room. Mama Ajua was already awake. The elderly woman sat quietly beside the small window, humming a melody so soft that it almost blended with the sounds of awakening birds. Faith listened without speaking. There was something strangely familiar about the tune, although she was certain she had never heard it before. It sounded elegant, old, almost like a lullaby passed down through generations. When the song ended, Faith smiled. "That was beautiful." Mama Ajua looked confused. "Was I singing?" "You don't remember?" The old woman slowly shook her head. "I don't even know where I learned it." Faith poured 2 cups of weak tea and handed one to her. "Maybe it comes from your childhood." Mama Ajua stared into the steaming cup. "My childhood." She repeated the words quietly, as if trying to reach through a thick fog. "I remember sunlight." Faith remained silent. "I remember a large garden." Her voice became distant. "There were yellow flowers. And," she frowned, "a little girl." Faith leaned forward. "What about her?" Mama Ajua closed her eyes. The image seemed almost within reach. She laughed whenever butterflies landed on her hands. A faint smile appeared on the old woman's face. "I used to tell her not to chase them." Faith's heart beat a little faster. "Was she your daughter?" Before Mama Ajua could answer, the memory vanished. The old woman pressed both hands against her temples. "I don't know." Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. "I don't know anything anymore." Faith immediately moved beside her. "You don't have to force yourself." "I hate forgetting." "I know." "What if I never remember?" Faith gently held her hands. "Then we'll make new memories together." The simple sentence brought another wave of tears. No one had ever offered Mama Ajua a future, instead of demanding her past. After breakfast, Faith prepared to leave for another day of work. This time, she hesitated. She didn't want to leave the old woman alone again. "What if you come with me today?" Mama Adjoa looked uncertain. "I'll only slow you down." "You won't," Faith smiled. "We'll take breaks whenever you need." The old woman nodded. "I'd like that." Their first stop was a small tailoring shop where Faith worked several mornings each week cleaning floors and organizing fabrics. The owner, Mrs. Nyarko looked surprised when Faith arrived with an elderly companion. "Who's this?" "This is Mama Adjoa." Mrs. Nyarko smiled politely. "Welcome." Mama Adjoa returned the smile with quiet dignity. Although her clothes were old and worn, there was something graceful about the way she carried herself. She thanked Mrs. Nyarko with perfect manners. She carefully removed her sandals before stepping onto the freshly cleaned floor without being asked. She apologized each time she thought she might be in someone's way. Mrs. Nyarko watched her with growing curiosity. Later, while Faith swept the back room, Mrs. Nyarko whispered, "She doesn't behave like someone who's lived on the streets for years." Faith looked up. "I've noticed that too. She speaks carefully." Faith nodded. "And sometimes," she lowered her voice, "she suddenly uses words I don't even understand." Mrs. Nyarko glanced toward Mama Adjoa, who was quietly folding scraps of fabric into perfectly organized piles. "Where did she learn that?" Faith sighed. "I wish I knew." When the cleaning was finished, Mrs. Nyarko handed Faith her wages. Then she surprised both women. "I have something else." She disappeared into a storage room before returning with a neatly folded dress. It was simple, cream-colored, clean, almost new. It was made for a customer who never collected it. She offered it to Mama Adjoa. "I think it belongs with you." The old woman stared at the dress. Her fingers gently touched the fabric. Without warning, another memory flashed across her mind. Soft cream fabric, a grand staircase, a chandelier sparkling overhead, people applauding, someone saying, "Mrs. Mensah, everyone is waiting for your speech." Mama Adjoa gasped. Her breathing quickened. The dress slipped from her hands. Faith rushed toward her. "What happened?" The old woman looked terrified. "I was standing somewhere. Where there were hundreds of people." Faith held her shoulders gently. "Oh, what else?" They were clapping. "For you." "I don't know." Mama Adjoa closed her eyes tightly. "My head hurts." The memory disappeared as suddenly as it had come. Faith thanked Mrs. Nyarko before helping Mama Adjoa outside. They sat beneath a large tree until the dizziness passed. Faith offered her water. "You don't have to remember everything today." The old woman looked at her sadly. "But someone is waiting for those memories." Faith smiled softly. "Maybe, but right now, I'm only worried about you." Across the city, inside the executive boardroom of Mensah Holdings, another meeting had begun. The room was silent. Large photographs of the company's founder decorated the walls. Ironically, every portrait showed the smiling face of Adjoa Mensah before her disappearance. Most of the younger executives had never actually met her. To them, she was little more than a legendary figure. Kwesi Owusu stood at the head of the table. "The annual shareholders meeting is in 3 weeks." Everyone nodded. "Our investors expect stability." One executive spoke carefully. "There are still rumors." Kwesi's eyes narrowed. "What rumors?" "That Madame Adjoa might still be alive." The room became silent. Kwesi forced a laugh. "People enjoy fairy tales." Another board member looked uneasy. "But if she returned?" Kwesi interrupted immediately. "She won't." His tone ended the discussion. After the meeting ended, he returned alone to his office. He opened a locked drawer. Inside lay an old newspaper. The headline read, "Mensah Holdings, Founder Missing After Charity Event." Below the headline was a younger Adjoa Mensah smiling confidently beside hundreds of schoolchildren. Kweshi stared at the photograph. "You should have stayed gone." He folded the newspaper carefully. A knock came at the door. The private investigator entered. "I have another report." Kweshi didn't look up. "Speak." "The old woman is beginning to remember things." Kweshi's expression hardened. "What kind of things?" "Fragments. Gardens. Meetings. A little girl." Kweshi remained perfectly still. "And Faith, she believes the memories may help identify her." Kweshi slowly walked toward the window overlooking Accra. Below him, thousands of ordinary people hurried through the streets, completely unaware of the battle quietly unfolding above them. "What about the orphan?" The investigator hesitated. "People like her." Kweshi frowned. "The bakery owner. The tailor. The clinic doctor. Even neighbors. They all trust her." Kweshi smiled coldly. "Trust is fragile." He turned slowly. "If people begin believing she's dishonest." The investigator understood immediately. "You want to destroy her reputation." "I want to isolate her." He walked back toward his desk. Kind people survive because communities protect them. He tapped one finger against the photographs. "So, first," he smiled, "we remove the community." That evening, Faith and Mama Adjoa walked home carrying a small bag of vegetables Mrs. Nyarko had insisted they take. The narrow streets were peaceful. Children laughed while playing football nearby. Faith felt hopeful for the first time in days. Perhaps life was finally becoming a little easier. Neither of them noticed the man standing beside a parked motorcycle across the street. He quietly lifted his phone. He took several photographs, then another. One captured Faith holding Mama Adjoa's arm. Another showed Faith accepting the bag of vegetables. The man smiled to himself. To anyone who didn't know the truth, the photographs could easily tell a different story. A story about a young woman taking advantage of a confused old beggar. Exactly the story Kwesi Owusu wanted the world to believe. Faith Mensah could not stop thinking about the two strangers who had visited the laundry. Their polished shoes, their expensive watches, the thick envelope filled with money. Most of all, the single condition they had given her. Leave the old woman. Forget she ever existed. The offer made no sense. Why would anyone spend so much money just to separate a poor orphan from a homeless woman? As she walked home through the evening traffic of Accra, the question lingered in her mind. By the time she reached her small rented room, the sky had already turned orange. Mama Adjoa was sitting outside watching several children play football in the dusty alley. The moment she saw Faith, her face brightened. "You came back." Faith smiled. "I told you I would." The old woman stood slowly. "I was afraid I'd forgotten the way home again." Faith gently held her arm. "You remembered enough to wait." Together they entered the tiny room. Faith unpacked a small bag containing rice tomatoes, onions, and a little dried fish. "It isn't much," she said, "but tonight we'll eat well." Mama Adjoa quietly watched her prepare dinner. After a long silence, she spoke. "You work too hard." Faith laughed softly. "So do many people. But you never keep anything for yourself." Faith stirred the pot. "I have enough." The old woman looked around the room. One narrow bed, one plastic chair, a cracked table, a tiny stove. Nothing suggested abundance. Yet Faith still believed she had enough. That realization made Mama Adjoa unexpectedly emotional. During dinner, the elderly woman suddenly became unusually quiet. She stared at the spoon in her hand. Then she whispered, I think I used to eat at a very long table. Faith looked up. A dining table. Mama Adjoa nodded slowly. There were many chairs. People waited until I sat down before they started eating. Faith leaned forward. Do you remember who those people were? The old woman closed her eyes. I can't see their faces. What else do you remember? There were flowers. She frowned. And people kept calling me. She stopped. Her breathing became uneven. They called me. Faith waited patiently, but the memory slipped away. Mama Adjoa opened her eyes in frustration. It's gone. Faith reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. It will come back when you're ready. The old woman managed a weak smile. I hope you're right. The next morning, Faith left early for work at the neighborhood laundry. Mr. Ofori noticed she seemed distracted. Something happened. Faith hesitated before telling him about the strangers. They wanted me to stop caring for Mama Adjoa. Mr. Ofori frowned. Did they explain why? No. They only offered money. How much? Faith quietly described the amount. Mr. Ofori stared at her in disbelief. That's more than most people here earn in several years. I know. And you refused. Faith smiled. I couldn't sell someone who depends on me. Mr. Ofori nodded slowly. I'm glad you didn't. Faith looked surprised. You don't think I made a mistake? The older man shook his head. Money earned by abandoning another human being never brings peace. His words reassured her. She returned to work, but an uneasy feeling remained. Around lunchtime, she stepped outside to buy bottled water. Across the street, she noticed a black SUV parked beneath a large tree. Its windows were heavily tinted. She couldn't see inside. As soon as she looked toward it, the vehicle quietly drove away. She frowned. Perhaps it was only a coincidence. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Several kilometers away, on the top floor of Mensah Holdings, Kwesi Owusu sat behind a massive wooden desk. The private investigator stood before him. She rejected the money. Kwesi wasn't surprised. I expected that. The girl appears impossible to buy. Kwesi slowly tapped his fingers against the desk. Everyone has a weakness. We haven't found hers. Kwesi stood and walked toward the window. What about the old woman? The memories are returning. Slowly. Fragments only. Kwesi remained silent. The investigator continued. She mentioned gardens, a large dining room, and someone calling her by a title. Kwesi's face tightened. That was dangerous. If Adjoa recovered enough memories, everything he had hidden for 22 years could collapse. He turned toward the investigator. Increase the surveillance. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they speak to, and everything the old woman remembers. The investigator nodded. Yes, sir. Back at the laundry, Faith finished work later than usual. Mr. Ofori handed her wages before she left. Then he added a small bag filled with leftover bread. For you and your friend. Faith smiled gratefully. Thank you. As she walked home, she noticed the same black SUV again. This time it was parked farther down the road. When she slowed her pace, it slowly pulled away once more. Her heart began beating faster. Someone was definitely following her. She resisted the urge to run. Instead, she continued walking naturally until she reached home. Mama Adjoa, the old woman appeared from inside. You look frightened. Faith glanced toward the street. I think someone has been following me. Mama Adjoa instinctively stepped closer. Come inside. Faith locked the door behind them. For the first time since meeting Mama Adjoa, she felt genuinely afraid. Not for herself, for the old woman. That evening, while they prepared dinner together, someone knocked gently on the door. Faith froze. No one usually visited. She carefully opened it a few centimeters. Standing outside was Dr. Mensah, the physician who had treated Mama Adjoa at the clinic. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said kindly. Faith looked surprised. "Doctor, I was passing through the neighborhood." He smiled. "I wanted to check on my patient." Mama Adjoa welcomed him inside. After a brief examination, Dr. Mensah nodded with satisfaction. "Your blood pressure is improving." The old woman smiled. "And because someone reminds me to take my medicine." The doctor looked toward Faith. "You're doing an excellent job." As he prepared to leave, he quietly pulled Faith aside. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He lowered his voice. "Yesterday, 2 well-dressed men came to the clinic asking about the elderly woman." Faith's expression changed. What did they want? They offered money for her medical records. Faith felt a chill run through her body. "Did you give them anything?" The doctor shook his head firmly. "Patient records are confidential." He paused before adding, "But whoever they are, they're very determined to find her." After the doctor left, Faith stood silently near the window. Across the street, under the dim glow of a streetlight, she saw the black SUV once again. It remained parked without moving. Someone inside was watching the house. Faith slowly closed the curtain. She finally understood one thing. Meeting Mama Adjoa had never been an accident, and somewhere in Accra, a powerful person was willing to spend money, hire investigators, and follow 2 poor women through the city. The question was no longer whether Mama Adjoa had an important past. The real question was how dangerous that past truly was. Faith Mensah barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the black SUV parked beneath the streetlight outside her building. She remembered the 2 men who had offered her more money than she had ever imagined. She remembered Dr. Mensah's warning that strangers had tried to buy Mama Adjoa's medical records. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. Someone was searching for the elderly woman, someone powerful, someone who wanted to reach her before the truth did. Just before sunrise, Faith quietly opened the curtain. The street looked normal. Women were sweeping the front of their homes. A bread seller pushed his wooden cart toward the market. Children in school uniforms hurried past with heavy backpacks. The SUV was gone. Faith released a slow breath. Perhaps whoever had been watching them had finally left. She turned toward the bed. Mama Adjoa was already awake. The elderly woman smiled gently. "You didn't sleep." Faith tried to hide her tiredness. "I'll be fine. You've been worrying about me." Faith sat beside her. "I just want you to be safe." Mama Adjoa reached for Faith's hand. "I've lived long enough. But you still have your whole life ahead of you." Faith shook her head. "Your life matters too." The old woman looked at her with quiet affection. "You really believe every life has value?" Faith answered without hesitation. "I do." Mama Adjoa smiled, but there was sadness behind her eyes. "I wish more people believed that." After breakfast, Faith walked Mama Adjoa to the small community center, where elderly residents often spent the morning talking knitting or reading newspapers. One of the volunteers, Auntie Abena, greeted them warmly. "She's welcome to stay here until you finish work." Faith smiled gratefully. "Thank you." Mama Adjoa looked uncertain. "What if I forget where you are?" Faith knelt beside her. "I'll come back before sunset. I promise." The old woman nodded slowly. "I'll wait." Faith left for the laundry feeling slightly relieved. At least Mama Adjoa would not be alone. The morning passed quietly. Faith washed clothes, folded uniforms, and greeted regular customers with her usual kindness. Around noon, a young woman entered, carrying a basket of laundry. She appeared nervous. Faith smiled. "Good afternoon." The woman forced a smile. "Good afternoon." As Faith weighed the clothes, the customer suddenly leaned closer. "Are you Faith Mensah?" "Yes." The woman hesitated. "I don't think you should go home the usual way today." Faith looked confused. "What do you mean?" Before she could ask another question, the customer hurried away without collecting a receipt. Faith stood frozen. Mr. Ofori noticed her expression. "Everything all right?" Faith quietly repeated what had happened. The older man frowned. "Do you know her?" "I've never seen her before." He looked toward the street. "Be careful today." Faith nodded. For the rest of the afternoon, she couldn't concentrate. When work finally ended, she decided not to take her usual route. Instead, she walked through a busier road filled with shops and pedestrians. Halfway home, she noticed two men standing beside a newspaper stand. One of them looked strangely familiar. It was one of the men who had offered her money. The moment he saw Faith, he spoke into a phone. Faith immediately turned into another street. Her heartbeat quickened. She didn't run. Running would confirm she had noticed them. Instead, she continued walking until she reached the community center. She pushed open the gate. "Auntie Abena." The volunteer looked up. "Oh, Faith." "Where's Mama Ajwa?" Auntie Abena smiled. "She was here all day." Then, about 30 minutes ago, two gentlemen arrived. Faith's face lost its color. Two gentlemen. They said they were relatives. Faith grabbed the older woman's arm. "Where is she now?" "They said they were taking her to a better hospital." Faith's heart pounded. "I never gave anyone permission." Auntie Abena looked shocked. "They knew her name." "They knew yours too. They even said you were busy working." Faith turned and ran. She searched every nearby street. Nothing. She hurried toward the clinic. No sign of Mama Ajwa. She checked the market. Nothing. The bus station. Nothing. Nearly an hour passed before she finally saw a familiar figure sitting alone outside a small roadside chapel. "Mama Ajwa." The elderly woman looked up. "Faith." Faith rushed forward and hugged her tightly. "What happened?" The old woman looked confused. "Two men came. They wanted me to go with them." Faith's breathing became uneven. "Why didn't you?" Mama Ajwa frowned. "I almost did. But then," she smiled softly, "I remembered something." Faith waited. "I remembered your face." The old woman gently touched Faith's cheek. "You told me never to leave with strangers." Faith felt tears fill her eyes. "So I walked away." She hugged the old woman again. "You did exactly the right thing." They slowly began walking home. Neither of them noticed a camera hidden inside a parked vehicle. Click. Another photograph. Then another. Back inside Mensah Holdings, Kwesi Owusu studied the latest report. They almost had her. The investigator lowered his head. She refused to go. "Why, she said she only trusted Faith." Kwesi slammed the folder shut. "Unbelievable." The investigator spoke cautiously. "The bond between them is becoming stronger." Kwesi walked toward the window. "That girl is ruining everything." He remained silent for several seconds. Then he turned. "If we can't separate them physically," he smiled coldly, "we'll separate them publicly." The investigator understood immediately. "You want people to stop trusting Faith." "Exactly." Kwesi opened another folder. Inside were the photographs secretly taken over the past several days. Faith feeding Mama Ajwa. Faith holding her arm. Faith accepting groceries from neighbors. Faith helping her into the clinic. Taken out of context, they could tell almost any story. Queshy tapped the photographs. Prepare anonymous messages. What kind? Tell people the orphan is pretending to care for a confused old woman. Say she's collecting donations. Say she's planning to steal whatever property the old woman owns. The investigator hesitated. But none of that is true. Queshy looked directly at him. The truth isn't what people hear first. It's what survives last. The next morning the rumors began. A woman whispered outside the bakery, "I heard she's using the old woman for money." Another replied, "Really? I thought she was kind." So did I. At the market, two vendors stopped talking when Faith approached. A customer quietly pulled her child away from Mama Adjoa. By afternoon, the rumors had spread through several neighborhoods. No one knew where they had started. Everyone claimed they had heard them from someone else. Faith noticed the change immediately. People who normally greeted her warmly suddenly avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when she walked past. Smiles disappeared. She didn't understand why. As she and Mama Adjoa returned home that evening, a teenage boy pointed toward them. "That's the girl they're talking about." His mother quickly pulled him away. Faith looked confused. "What are they saying?" The woman refused to answer. Mama Adjoa quietly squeezed Faith's hand. "They're afraid." Faith forced a small smile. "I've done nothing wrong." "I know." The old woman looked into the distance. But sometimes, her voice became heavy. "Good people are punished long before the truth arrives." Faith had no answer. For the first time since meeting Mama Adjoa, she realized that the battle ahead would not only be against one powerful man, it would also be against suspicion, gossip, and a community that was slowly being convinced to doubt the goodness they had once admired. The rumors spread faster than Faith Mensah could have imagined. Within 2 days, they reached nearly every corner of her neighborhood. People no longer greeted her with the same warmth. Some simply looked away. Others whispered after she passed. Faith pretended not to notice, but every silent stare felt heavier than an insult. That Monday morning, she arrived at the bakery before sunrise, as she always did. Mr. Bodu was already arranging fresh loaves on the shelves. He looked unusually uncomfortable. "Good morning, Faith." She smiled. "Good morning, sir." He avoided her eyes. "We need to talk." Faith immediately sensed something was wrong. She quietly placed her broom against the wall. "What happened?" Mr. Bodu sighed. "I've been hearing things." Faith remained calm. "So have I. They're saying you've been collecting money using an old homeless woman." Faith shook her head. "None of it is true." "I know." His answer surprised her. "You know?" Mr. Bodu nodded. "I've known you for 3 years. You've never lied to me. You've never taken anything that wasn't yours." Faith felt relieved, but his expression remained troubled. "Then everything is all right?" He slowly shook his head. "It isn't that simple." Faith's smile faded. "Several customers complained yesterday. They said if I keep employing you—" He paused. "They'll stop buying bread here." Silence filled the bakery. Faith lowered her eyes. "I understand." Mr. Bodu looked pained. "I tried to defend you." "I really did." "I know. But I have 6 employees. Their families depend on this bakery." Faith forced herself to smile. "You don't have to explain." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She quietly removed her work apron and folded it neatly. Before leaving, she bowed respectfully. "Thank you for believing me." Mr. Bodu watched her walk away. For the first time in years, Faith left the bakery without a single loaf of bread. Outside, she took a deep breath. She refused to cry. She still had another job. Everything would be all right. Or so she hoped. An hour later, she arrived at the tailoring shop. Mrs. Nyarko greeted her with an uneasy expression. Faith. The young woman immediately understood. You've heard the rumors. Mrs. Nyarko nodded sadly. I don't believe them. Faith smiled faintly. Thank you. But, she looked away. My husband is worried. He thinks customers will avoid the shop. Faith closed her eyes briefly. You need to let me go. Tears formed in Mrs. Nyarko's eyes. I hate doing this. I know. Faith gently hugged the older woman. You've already helped me more than enough. She collected her small backpack and quietly left. By noon, she had lost both of her regular jobs. She still had occasional work at the laundry. But even there, trouble soon arrived. Mr. Ofori was waiting outside when she approached. His face looked exhausted. They came here too. Faith didn't need to ask who. They threatened your business. He nodded. They didn't threaten. They warned. They said customers won't trust someone who employs a fraud. Faith looked directly into his eyes. If keeping me here hurts your family. Mr. Ofori interrupted. I haven't made a decision. Faith smiled sadly. You already have. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've done nothing wrong. By sunset, Faith had lost every source of steady income. She slowly walked home, carrying only a small bag containing 2 onions and half a loaf of bread she had purchased with her last few coins. When she entered the room, she tried to smile. Mama Adjoa immediately noticed. What happened? Nothing important. The old woman quietly studied her face. You lost your job. Faith looked surprised. How did you know? I recognize that smile. What smile? The one people wear when they're trying to protect someone else. Faith sat beside her. The rumors reached my employers. Mama Adjoa's shoulders slumped. This is because of me. No, it isn't. If I hadn't come into your life, Faith gently interrupted. Don't ever say that. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. I've destroyed your future. Faith firmly shook her head. My future isn't a job. My future is becoming the kind of person I want to be. She smiled softly. And helping you is part of that. Mama Adjoa could no longer hold back her tears. She embraced Faith tightly. No one had ever defended her so fiercely, not even people who had once called themselves family. The following morning, Faith woke before dawn. She quietly counted the money she had left. It wasn't enough. Even if they skipped meals, they would struggle to pay rent. She looked around the tiny room. There was nothing valuable to sell. Only a fan, 2 blankets, a kettle, some old books. Then her eyes fell upon the faded hospital blanket she had kept since childhood. She carefully folded it. No, some things were worth more than money. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Faith opened the door. Outside stood Mrs. Addo. She carried 2 grocery bags. I heard what happened. Faith immediately understood. You don't have to do this. Mrs. Addo smiled warmly. I know, but I'm doing it anyway. She stepped inside. Rice, beans, cooking oil, fresh vegetables, even milk. Faith stared at the groceries. I can't repay this. Mrs. Addo gently touched her arm. Years ago, when my husband was in the hospital, you worked an extra week without asking for payment because you knew I couldn't afford help. Faith barely remembered. It wasn't important. It was to me. She smiled. Kindness always comes back. After Mrs. Addo left, another knock came. Then another. An elderly fruit seller arrived with bananas. The newspaper boy brought bottled water. A taxi driver left a sack of charcoal outside the door. None of them stayed long. None expected anything in return. By evening, the tiny room contained enough food to last nearly 2 weeks. Faith looked around in disbelief. Mama Adjoa smiled. "You see?" "What?" "You've been rich all along." Faith laughed. "I don't understand." "You've spent your whole life investing in people." The old woman pointed toward the groceries. "Today they're returning the investment." Faith sat quietly. She had never thought of kindness that way, not as something that expected repayment, but as something that quietly lived inside other people until the day it was needed. Across the city, Kwesi Owusu received another report. The rumors worked. The investigator smiled. She lost every job. Kwesi nodded. "Good." Then the investigator hesitated. "There's one problem." "What, The neighbors, they're helping her." Kwesi frowned. "What do you mean? They're bringing food, money, supplies. The community still believes in her." Kwesi slammed his hand onto the desk. "Why?" The investigator answered honestly. "Because they've known her for years. They trust their own experiences more than anonymous gossip." Kwesi's jaw tightened. He hated hearing that. Fear and lies usually worked. This time they weren't enough. He walked toward the window. Far below, thousands of people moved through the streets of Accra. One poor orphan should have been easy to destroy. Instead, every attempt seemed to strengthen the loyalty of those who truly knew her. Meanwhile, back in the tiny rented room, Mama Adjoa sat quietly beside the window. She watched children playing outside. Suddenly, one little girl laughed while chasing a yellow butterfly. The sight froze her in place. Yellow butterflies, a sunny garden, a tiny girl laughing, a silver necklace shaped like a star. Then, for the first time in more than 20 years, one forgotten name rose clearly from the depths of her memory. "Faith!" She whispered it without realizing. Then another sentence escaped her trembling lips. "I promised I would never stop looking for my little girl." Faith turned around immediately. "What did you say?" Mama Adjoa pressed both hands against her chest. Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know, but I think—" She struggled to breathe. "I think I had a daughter." Faith Mensah stood frozen. The words echoed inside the tiny room long after Mama Adjoa had spoken them. "I think I had a daughter." For several seconds, neither of them moved. The evening breeze drifted through the half-open window, carrying the distant sounds of children laughing outside. Faith slowly knelt beside the elderly woman. "You remembered something." Mama Adjoa pressed both hands against her temples. "I don't know if it's real." Her breathing became uneven. "It felt real." "What did you see?" The old woman closed her eyes. "A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 2 years old." "What else?" She was laughing. A faint smile appeared on Mama Adjoa's face before fading again. "There were yellow butterflies, a garden, and—" She struggled to remember. "I was wearing white." Faith listened without interrupting. "I kept telling her not to run too far." The old woman's smile disappeared. Then everything became dark. She opened her eyes suddenly. "I can't remember anything after that." Faith gently held her hand. "That's all right. The memories are coming back." Mama Adjoa looked frightened. "What if they're wrong?" "They don't feel wrong." Faith spoke with quiet confidence. "They've been returning little by little. There must be a reason." The elderly woman nodded slowly, though uncertainty remained in her eyes. That night, neither of them slept well. Faith lay awake thinking about everything that had happened during the past week. The luxury SUVs, the strangers offering money, the rumors, the surveillance. Now, these memories. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep Mama Adjoa hidden. The question was no longer whether the old woman had once been important. The question was what had happened to her daughter. Early the next morning, Faith made a decision. "We're going somewhere." Mama Adjoa looked curious. "Where?" "To the hospital." "The doctor?" Faith shook her head. "No. An older hospital. The place where you may have been treated years ago." The old woman looked uncertain. "Do you think they'll know me?" "I don't know. But we have to try." They boarded an overcrowded public minibus, heading towards central Accra. Faith had asked Dr. Mensah the previous evening whether any older hospitals might still keep records from more than 20 years earlier. He had suggested St. Gabriel Memorial Hospital, one of the oldest medical institutions in the city. If Mama Adjoa had given birth there, some record might still exist. After nearly an hour, they arrived at the aging hospital complex. The main building showed its age, paint peeled from the walls, old trees shaded the courtyard. Generations of families had passed through its doors. Faith approached the reception desk. A middle-aged administrator looked up. "Can I help you?" Faith smiled politely. "We're looking for very old maternity records." "How old?" "About 22 years. The woman sighed. "Most records from that period are stored in the archives." "Can we search them?" "Only with permission." Faith explained that Mama Adjoa suffered from memory loss and was trying to recover her identity. The administrator studied the elderly woman carefully. Something about Mama Adjoa's face seemed strangely familiar. "I'll ask the records supervisor." Several minutes later, an elderly archivist named Mr. Kumi appeared. His white hair and slow steps suggested decades of service. "I understand you're searching for an old file." Faith nodded. "Yes, sir." Mr. Kumi adjusted his glasses. "We'll need names." Faith hesitated. She believes her name may be Adjoa. The archivist wrote it down. "Anything else?" Mama Adjoa suddenly whispered. "I think—" She paused. "I think my surname was—" Her forehead tightened. Then, almost instinctively, she spoke. "Mensah." Faith stared at her. The archivist froze. "What did you say?" "Mensah." Mr. Kumi looked surprised. There weren't many patients with that surname. He disappeared into the archive room. Faith looked at Mama Adjoa. "You remembered." The old woman looked just as shocked. "I didn't even think. It just came out." Nearly 30 minutes passed. Finally, Mr. Kumi returned carrying several dusty folders. He placed them carefully on the table. "We've found 3 maternity records under the name Mensah from that year." Faith's heart raced. The archivist opened the first file. Not the right person. The second. Also incorrect. Then he slowly opened the third folder. He frowned. "This is unusual." Faith leaned forward. "What is it?" "The file is incomplete." Several pages had clearly been removed. Only fragments remained. The archivist examined what was left. "Patient," he squinted. "Adjoa Mensah." Faith held her breath. The old man's finger moved across the faded document. "Female infant delivered." He turned another page, then stopped. "The next pages are missing." Faith asked quietly, "Could they have been destroyed?" Mr. Kumi looked troubled. "Hospital records are rarely removed, especially birth records." "So where are they?" "I honestly don't know." Mama Adjoa reached toward the folder with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the old paper, another memory flashed before her eyes. Bright hospital lights. A crying baby. A nurse smiling. Someone placing a tiny silver necklace around an infant's neck. Then shouting, running footsteps, voices arguing. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Mama Adjoa gasped, "My baby!" Faith immediately held her shoulders. What happened? They took her. Who? I... Tears filled the old woman's eyes. I couldn't stop them. The archivist looked deeply concerned. He quietly searched inside the folder once more. Suddenly, something slipped from between 2 pages. A small yellowed hospital tag. Faith picked it up carefully. Most of the writing had faded. Only a few words remained legible. Mother Adjoa Mensah, infant. Female status transferred. Faith looked confused. Transferred. To where? Mr. Kumi shook his head. The rest has been torn away. Faith stared at the tag. Someone had deliberately removed the information that mattered most. Before anyone could speak again, another voice interrupted. Excuse me. Everyone turned. A young hospital employee stood near the doorway. He looked nervous. I've seen that file before. Mr. Kumi looked surprised. You have? The young man nodded. Years ago. My supervisor told me never to mention it. Faith stepped closer. Why? He hesitated. I overheard 2 administrators arguing, and they said someone from a large corporation paid a lot of money to access those records. Faith's heart skipped. When? I don't remember exactly. But it was many years ago. Mr. Kumi's expression darkened. No company has the right to alter hospital records. The young employee lowered his voice. I also remember one name. Faith waited anxiously. What name? The young man frowned, trying to remember. It started with K. His face brightened. Kweshi. Faith's eyes widened. Mama Adjoa looked confused. Who is Kwesi? Faith didn't answer. She had heard that name before. Kwesi Owusu. The CEO whose men had offered her money. The man connected to every strange event since she met Mama Adjoa. At that very moment, several streets away, a black SUV quietly stopped outside St. Gabriel Memorial Hospital. The investigator stepped out while speaking into his phone. They've entered the archives. A brief silence followed. Then Kwesi's cold voice answered. Don't let them leave with anything important. The investigator looked toward the hospital entrance. They may already know more than we expected. Kwesi's reply came immediately. Then make sure they never discover the missing pages. Faith Mensah carefully folded the faded hospital tag and slipped it into her backpack. It was only a small piece of paper. Most people would have dismissed it as worthless. To Faith, it was the first real evidence that Mama Adjoa's memories were connected to something that had actually happened. Mr. Kumi closed the damaged file with obvious frustration. In all my years working here, he said quietly, I've never seen birth records disappear like this. Faith looked at him. Could someone have removed them legally? The elderly archivist shook his head. No. Every page taken from the archives must be documented. And there is no record of that. None. Mama Adjoa stared silently at the worn folder. Her fingers trembled. I remember a baby crying. She spoke so softly that Faith almost didn't hear her. I remember holding her. Tears filled the old woman's eyes. I remember promising I would never let anyone take her away. She covered her face. But they did. Faith immediately wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You don't have to remember everything today. Mama Adjoa slowly lowered her hands. I need to know what happened. So do I. Mr. Kumi looked thoughtfully at both women. There may be one person who can help. Faith turned toward him. Who? A retired maternity nurse. She worked here for nearly 40 years. She has an extraordinary memory. Her name is Akosu Khoswa Boateng. Faith's eyes brightened. Do you know where she lives? Mr. Kumi nodded. She retired to a small town just outside Accra. He wrote an address on a piece of paper and handed it to Faith. If anyone remembers the events surrounding that missing file, he paused. It would be her. Faith accepted the note gratefully. Thank you. As she and Mama Adjoa prepared to leave, the young hospital employee who had mentioned Kwesi quietly approached them. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening. You should be careful. Faith frowned. Why? The man who asked about those records wasn't alone. There were security officers with him. He spoke as though he owned the place. Faith exchanged a glance with Mama Adjoa. Did he take anything himself? I never saw. But after that visit, the young man lowered his voice even further. Those missing pages were never seen again. Faith thanked him before leaving the hospital. Outside, the afternoon sun hung high above the city. People moved through the busy streets without realizing that two women had just uncovered the first thread of a 22-year-old mystery. Faith looked at the address in her hand. It's about an hour away by bus. Mama Adjoa nodded. Then, let's go. Before they reached the bus stop, Faith noticed something that immediately made her uneasy. Across the road stood the same black SUV. Its windows were dark. The engine was running. She pretended not to notice. Instead, she guided Mama Adjoa into a crowded convenience store. We need water, she said casually. The elderly woman sensed the tension. Someone is following us again. Faith gave a slight nod. I think so. They remained inside for several minutes. When Faith finally looked outside again, the SUV had disappeared. She wasn't convinced they were safe. Still, they boarded a crowded minibus and headed toward the address Mr. Kumi had provided. The journey took nearly 90 minutes. The town was quiet compared to Accra. Small houses lined the dusty roads. Children rode bicycles beneath tall mango trees. An elderly man, repairing a fence, pointed them toward a modest yellow house with a flower garden in front. Faith knocked gently. A few moments later, an elderly woman opened the door. She walked with the assistance of a wooden cane, but her eyes were bright and alert. Can I help you? Faith smiled politely. Are you Nurse Akosua Boteng? I am. My name is Faith Mensah. This is Mama Adjoa. The moment Nurse Akosua looked at Mama Adjoa, her expression changed. She stared for several long seconds. Then she whispered, It can't be. Mama Adjoa looked confused. Do we know each other? The retired nurse slowly raised a trembling hand toward her mouth. My goodness. I thought you were dead. Faith felt her heart race. You know her. Akosua stepped aside immediately. Please, come in. They entered the small living room. Family photographs filled the walls. The nurse remained standing, unable to take her eyes off Mama Adjoa. I would recognize your face anywhere. Mama Adjoa searched her own memories. I'm sorry. I don't remember. Akosua nodded gently. I've heard memory loss can do that. Faith leaned forward. You worked at St. Gabriel Hospital 22 years ago. Yes. We found part of her maternity record. The nurse closed her eyes briefly. So, the truth has finally begun to return. Faith's voice became almost a whisper. What happened? Akosua remained silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of many years. You gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Mama Adjoa's breathing became uneven. A girl. Yes. You loved her from the very first moment. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. I remember, Akosua continued. You insisted on placing a small silver star necklace beside her. Mama Adjoa gasped. The necklace! Faith immediately remembered the fragments of memory Mama Adjoa had described days earlier. It was real. Akosua nodded. It was. Faith asked the question she had feared since entering the house. What happened to the baby? The nurse looked down. The official report claimed the child died during the night. Mama Ajua shook violently. No, no. I would remember that. Akosua looked directly into her eyes. Because it wasn't true. Silence filled the room. Faith's heartbeat echoed in her ears. The baby didn't die. Akosua slowly shook her head. I saw her. She was alive. Faith could barely breathe. Then where did she go? The retired nurse sighed deeply. I never learned the full truth. But I witnessed something. What? Very late that night. She spoke carefully, choosing every word. 3 men entered the maternity ward. They weren't doctors. They weren't nurses. They carried official authorization papers. Mama Ajua covered her mouth. They took my baby. Akosua nodded sadly. I tried to stop them. They told me it was a family matter. I didn't believe them. Faith asked quietly, Did you report it? I did. What happened? My complaint disappeared. And 2 weeks later, she looked away. I was transferred to another hospital. Faith sat speechless. Everything was beginning to fit together. The missing records, the altered files, the surveillance, the attempted bribe. Someone had been protecting a terrible secret for decades. Mama Ajua suddenly reached for Akosua's hand. Did you ever see my daughter again? The nurse's eyes became moist. No, but I never believed she was dead. She smiled gently. I prayed that one day she would find her way back to you. Faith felt a lump rise in her throat. Before anyone could speak again, a loud engine stopped outside the house. All 3 women instinctively turned toward the window. A black SUV had pulled up in front of the gate. Faith's face grew pale. The vehicle's rear door slowly opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. Then a third. Faith recognized him immediately. He was one of the men who had tried to pay her to abandon Mama Ajua. The man adjusted his jacket and smiled as he walked toward the front door. Inside the house, no one spoke. The only sound was the slow, deliberate knock that echoed through the quiet living room. 3 firm knocks, then a calm voice from outside. Mrs. Boateng, we'd like to ask you a few questions. The knock echoed through the small living room. No one moved. Faith Mensah instinctively stepped in front of Mama Ajua, while Nurse Akosua Boateng looked toward the front door with visible concern. Another knock followed. This time, it was firmer. Mrs. Boateng, a man's voice called from outside. We know you're home. Akosua whispered, Stay here. She slowly walked toward the door without opening it. Who is it? The man answered politely. We're from Mensah Holdings. We'd like to speak with you regarding some old hospital records. Akosua glanced back at Faith. She understood immediately. The visitors had not come by coincidence. They had followed them. The retired nurse remained calm. I have nothing to discuss. The man outside smiled, though his voice carried little warmth. We're only asking for a few minutes. I'm afraid you'll have to leave. Silence followed. Then footsteps retreated from the front porch. Faith waited another minute before quietly peeking through the curtain. The 3 men had returned to their SUV. They're leaving, she whispered. Akosua slowly shook her head. No. They're waiting. Faith looked again. The engine remained running. The vehicle had not moved. They'll stay until we come outside, the nurse said. The room fell silent. Mama Ajua looked frightened. I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me. Faith immediately turned toward her. No one is blaming you. But they keep following us. They're following the truth. Faith spoke with unexpected confidence. And the closer we get to it, the more desperate they become. Akosua nodded. She's right. The retired nurse walked toward an old wooden cabinet and removed a small metal box. Inside were several neatly organized envelopes. She searched carefully before pulling out a faded notebook. I never stopped keeping records. Faith looked surprised. What is that? My personal diary. I wrote something after your mother's baby disappeared. Mama Ajawa's eyes widened. My baby. Akosua gently opened the notebook. The pages had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear. She slowly read aloud. The official report says the infant died, but I held that little girl in my arms only minutes before 3 strangers entered the ward. She was breathing. She was healthy. Someone is lying. Faith felt a chill run down her spine. Akosua continued reading. The child's mother begged to see her baby again, but security officers prevented anyone from entering the room. Mama Ajawa began crying quietly. Fragments of memory flashed through her mind. A hospital bed, bright lights, a desperate scream. Hands trying to hold her down. She covered her ears. I remember shouting. Faith rushed to comfort her. It's all right. I couldn't reach her. Mama Ajawa whispered through tears. They wouldn't let me. Faith held her tightly. You don't have to relive it alone. Akosua carefully closed the notebook. I kept this because I believed one day someone would ask what really happened. Faith looked at the diary. This could become evidence. It could, but only if it reaches the right people. She looked toward the window. And only if those men don't take it first. Outside, the black SUV remained parked across the road. The 3 men appeared to be waiting patiently. Faith thought for a moment. We can't leave through the front. Akosua smiled faintly. You don't have to. She pointed toward the kitchen. There is an old garden gate behind the house. 20 minutes later, the 3 women quietly slipped through the back garden. A narrow footpath led into a neighboring street, hidden by tall hedges. They walked quickly until they reached the main road, where they boarded the first bus heading back toward Accra. Only after the bus had traveled several kilometers did Faith finally relax. They didn't see us. Akosua nodded. But they will know soon. Faith looked at the notebook inside her backpack. This diary changes everything. Mama Ajawa stared silently through the bus window. She seemed distant again. Suddenly, she whispered, there was another woman. Faith looked at her. What woman? She was crying. In the hospital. She kept saying. Mama Ajawa struggled to remember. Take the child before it's too late. Faith frowned. Who said that? I don't know. The memory disappeared once more. Back at Mensah Holdings, Kwesi Owusu stood beside his office window when the investigator entered. We lost them. Kwesi turned sharply. What do you mean? They escaped through the back of the house. Kwesi's expression darkened. Did Akosua speak to them? We believe so. The investigator hesitated. There may be written records. What kind? A personal diary. Kwesi's jaw tightened. He immediately understood the danger. If that diary reaches a courtroom, he stopped speaking. Everything could unravel. The investigator waited. What are your orders? Kwesi walked slowly toward his desk. No more mistakes. We need every piece of evidence before they do. And the girl, Kwesi stared at Faith's photograph lying on the desk. I underestimated her. She's far more persistent than I expected. He picked up the picture. She's beginning to connect everything. The investigator spoke carefully. Should we confront her directly? Kwesi shook his head. No, not yet. He smiled coldly. Fear works better when people don't know who's creating it. Meanwhile, Faith and Mama Ajawa finally returned to their neighborhood after sunset. The narrow streets felt unusually quiet. As they approached their building, Faith noticed several neighbors standing outside. Mrs. Addo hurried toward them. "Thank goodness!" Faith looked confused. "What happened?" "The landlord came." Faith's heart sank. "What did he want?" Mrs. Addo looked uncomfortable. "He said someone offered to buy the building." Faith frowned. "So, the new owner wants every tenant to leave within 1 week." Faith stared at her. "Everyone," Mrs. Addo slowly shook her head. "No, only you." Silence filled the street. Faith looked toward the building where she had lived for nearly 4 years. Her small room, her only home. The landlord stepped outside carrying several papers. "I'm sorry, Faith. I've already signed the agreement." Faith asked quietly, "Who bought the building?" "I don't know. The documents came through lawyers." He handed her an official notice. "You have 7 days." Faith accepted the paper without speaking. Mama Adjoa looked devastated. "This is my fault." Faith forced a small smile despite the ache in her chest. "No, it isn't." Mrs. Addo stepped closer. "You can stay with us." Faith immediately shook her head. "I can't impose." "It isn't an imposition." Another neighbor spoke up. "If necessary, we'll all help." A taxi driver added, "No one should become homeless because of lies." Faith looked around. Despite everything, the people who truly knew her still believed in her. She felt tears gather in her eyes, not because she was losing her home, but because kindness continued to appear when she needed it most. That night, after Mama Adjoa had fallen asleep, Faith unfolded the eviction notice once more. Something caught her attention. At the bottom of the page was the name of the legal firm that had processed the purchase. She had seen it before. It was printed on the business card the 2 strangers had left at the laundry. The same legal firm represented Mensah Holdings. Faith slowly folded the paper. She no longer doubted it. Kwesi Owusu wasn't simply watching them anymore. He was systematically destroying every place where they could feel safe. And somehow, she knew the next move would be even more dangerous. Faith Mensah did not tell Mama Adjoa about the name she had found on the eviction notice. The elderly woman had endured enough worry already. Instead, Faith folded the document, neatly placed it inside her backpack beside Nurse Akosua's diary and the faded hospital tag, then quietly prepared breakfast. The small room felt unusually silent. Normally, Faith enjoyed the peaceful mornings. Today, every sound seemed to carry uncertainty. She looked around at the few possessions she owned: a narrow bed, 2 plastic chairs, a kettle, several old books. Everything she had built since leaving the orphanage could fit into a few small bags. Losing the room would be painful, but losing the truth would be far worse. Mama Adjoa noticed the expression on Faith's face. "You've been thinking all night." Faith smiled gently. "A little." "About the house?" Faith hesitated before nodding. "We'll find somewhere else." The elderly woman reached across the table and covered Faith's hand with her own. "I've spent years sleeping wherever I could." She spoke softly. "But you finally found a place to belong. I don't want you to lose it because of me." Faith shook her head. "My home isn't these walls." Mama Adjoa looked puzzled. "Then what is it?" Faith smiled. "Home is wherever people refuse to abandon each other." The old woman lowered her eyes, deeply moved. No one had ever defined home that way for her. After breakfast, someone knocked gently on the door. Faith opened it. Dr. Mensah stood outside carrying a paper bag. "I was nearby." Faith smiled. "Please come in." The doctor greeted Mama Adjoa before taking a seat. "I heard about the eviction." Faith looked surprised. "News travels quickly." "In neighborhoods like this, it always does." He handed the paper bag to Faith. Inside were blood pressure tablets, vitamins, and a few medical supplies. These should last another month. Faith looked grateful. "Doctor, we can't keep accepting everything." Dr. Mensah smiled warmly. "You've already paid." Faith frowned. "I don't understand." "When my clinic needed volunteers during the flood, last year you worked 3 days without asking for anything," Faith remembered. "There were many people helping. Not enough." He looked toward Mama Adjoa. Kindness has a way of returning when we least expect it. Before leaving, the doctor lowered his voice. "I've made some inquiries." Faith listened carefully. "The legal firm on your eviction notice. What about it?" "It represents Mensah Holdings." Faith wasn't surprised anymore. "So it really is connected?" The doctor nodded. "I'm afraid so." After he left, Faith looked at Mama Adjoa. "I think we're getting closer." The elderly woman looked worried. "Or closer to danger," Faith answered honestly. "Probably both." Later that afternoon, Faith decided to visit Hope Children's Home. It had been several years since she last returned. If someone had searched for information about her, perhaps Sister Evelyn knew something. The orphanage stood exactly as Faith remembered. The old mango tree still shaded the courtyard. Children still laughed while chasing each other across the playground. The familiar sight filled her with unexpected emotion. Sister Evelyn smiled the moment she saw Faith. "My child." They embraced warmly. "It's been too long." Faith introduced Mama Adjoa. The elderly nun welcomed her kindly before leading them into her office. After several minutes of conversation, Faith carefully explained everything that had happened. The memories, the missing hospital records, the surveillance, the rumors, the diary. Sister Evelyn listened without interrupting. When Faith finally finished, the older woman became unusually quiet. "There may be something I've never told you." Faith looked surprised. "What is it?" Sister Evelyn slowly unlocked an old filing cabinet. She removed a thin folder labeled only with the year Faith had arrived. "I promised myself I would only open this if someone came searching for your past." Faith's heartbeat quickened. The nun placed the folder on the desk. "When you were brought here as a baby," she paused, "you weren't completely alone." Faith stared at her. "There was someone with me." Sister Evelyn nodded. "There was a woman." Mama Adjoa leaned forward. "A woman? Yes. She refused to tell us her name. She was terrified." Faith listened in complete silence. Sister Evelyn continued. She kept saying only one sentence. "What sentence?" "Protect this child." Faith felt chills run through her body. What happened to her? She disappeared before sunrise. Did she leave anything? Sister Evelyn carefully unfolded a small piece of paper preserved inside the folder. "This was hidden inside your blanket." Faith immediately recognized the faded hospital blanket she still owned. The nun handed her the note. Most of the ink had faded. Only a few words remained visible. "If anything happens, find." The remaining letters were almost impossible to read. Only one word remained perfectly clear. Star. Faith looked confused. "The star!" Mama Adjoa suddenly gasped. "My necklace!" Faith turned toward her. "What?" "The silver star necklace. The one I remembered." Her breathing quickened. "I gave it to my baby." Faith stared at the note again. Could the word star refer to the necklace? Before anyone could answer, Sister Evelyn spoke again. "There was something else." Faith looked up. "The woman who brought you here wasn't alone." "What do you mean?" "A black car followed her." Faith's heart skipped. "I watched from the window. The woman hid until the car drove away. Then she left you at our gate." Faith whispered, "She was protecting me." Sister Evelyn nodded slowly. "I believe she was." Mama Adjoa closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't remember her face, but somehow, I feel like she was trying to save us. Meanwhile, across the city, Kwesi Owusu received another update. They visited the orphanage. His expression immediately hardened. What did they find? We don't know. Our man arrived too late. Kwesi slammed his fist onto the desk. This is getting out of control. The investigator spoke cautiously. They're collecting evidence from too many places. The hospital. The retired nurse. The orphanage. Kwesi remained silent. Then he slowly walked toward a locked cabinet in the corner of his office. He unlocked it using a small key hidden beneath a picture frame. Inside lay an old velvet box. He opened it carefully. Resting inside was a delicate silver necklace shaped like a star. He stared at it for several long seconds. So, he whispered, they've reached this point. The investigator looked confused. What is it? Kwesi closed the box immediately. The one thing that must never be connected to the girl. He locked the cabinet once again. Then he looked directly at the investigator. No more waiting. I want every document they have. The diary, the hospital tag, everything. And if anyone stands in the way... He paused before finishing the sentence. Make sure they never reach the courtroom. Back at the orphanage, Sister Evelyn walked Faith and Mama Adjoa to the gate. Before saying goodbye, she placed both hands on Faith's shoulders. I've watched you grow from a frightened little girl into a remarkable woman. Faith smiled through tears. I couldn't have done it without you. The elderly nun shook her head gently. You became who you are because kindness was always inside you. She glanced at Mama Adjoa. I have a feeling, her voice softened, that kindness is about to bring you home. Faith looked back at the orphanage one final time before walking away. She still didn't know who had left her there 22 years earlier. But for the first time in her life, she believed the answer was no longer out of reach. Somewhere ahead, hidden beneath decades of lies, the truth was waiting, and neither she nor Mama Adjoa intended to stop searching until they found it. Faith Mensah held the faded note from the orphanage all the way home. She read the remaining words over and over. If anything happens, find star. The sentence was incomplete, but the final word refused to leave her mind. Star. The silver star necklace. Mama Adjoa had remembered placing one beside her baby immediately after giving birth. Sister Evelyn had found the word star hidden inside the blanket that arrived with Faith. It could not be another coincidence. By the time they reached their small rented room, darkness had settled over Accra. Faith carefully placed the note beside the hospital tag and Nurse Akoswa's diary. 3 separate pieces of evidence, 3 different places, 3 different people. Yet every one of them pointed toward the same forgotten past. Mama Adjoa sat quietly near the window. She looked unusually thoughtful. What are you thinking about? Faith asked. The elderly woman smiled faintly. I've spent years believing I had nothing. She looked toward the small collection of documents on the table. Now I have memories. Faith sat beside her. They're painful memories. They are. Mama Adjoa nodded. But they're mine. Faith gently squeezed her hand. We'll discover the rest together. The following morning, Faith woke to another knock on the door. This time it was Mrs. Addo. She looked worried. You need to see this. She handed Faith a folded newspaper. On the 3rd page was a small article. Community warns of fraud targeting elderly homeless people. Although no names appeared, the description was unmistakable. A young woman, an elderly homeless victim, false stories, manipulation. Faith immediately understood. Someone was no longer spreading rumors through whispers. They were using the media. Mrs. Addo looked angry. Everyone who knows you realizes this is nonsense. Faith remained calm. They're becoming desperate. Mama Adjoa quietly read the article. Then she whispered, "They're trying to erase you." Faith looked at her. "No, they're trying to stop us." After breakfast, Faith made another decision. "We need legal advice." Mama Adjoa nodded. "What about the lawyer Nurse Akosua mentioned?" Faith smiled. "Kojo Asare." The name had appeared several times during Nurse Akosua's account. She remembered Akosua saying that years ago there had once been a young legal advisor inside Mensah Holdings who had questioned several suspicious decisions. If anyone inside the company had remained honest, perhaps it was him. Finding him, however, proved difficult. Most people believed he had retired. Others thought he had moved abroad. Finally, Dr. Mensah suggested checking with the Ghana Bar Association. Late that afternoon, after several phone calls and bus rides, Faith located a modest legal office on the edge of the city. The sign outside simply read, "Kojo Asare, Legal Consultant." The office itself was small. Nothing suggested wealth or prestige. Faith knocked gently. A middle-aged man wearing reading glasses opened the door. "Good afternoon. My name is Faith Mensah. I was told you might be able to help us." Kojo invited them inside. His office contained shelves overflowing with law books. Awards hung quietly on one wall. Nothing extravagant. Everything practical. Faith carefully explained everything from the beginning. Meeting Mama Adjoa, the hospital records, the diary, the orphanage, the surveillance, the eviction, the newspaper article. Kojo listened without interrupting. When she finally finished, he remained silent for a long time. Then he looked directly at Mama Adjoa. "Do you remember me?" The elderly woman studied his face. Slowly, very slowly. She frowned. "I know your eyes." Kojo smiled sadly. "You used to say the same thing." Faith looked confused. "You've met before?" Kojo nodded. "Many times." He turned toward Faith. 22 years ago, I was a junior legal advisor at Mensah Holdings." Faith's heartbeat quickened. "I worked directly under Madame Adjoa." Mama Adjoa stared at him. "You worked for me. You hired me yourself." The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "I still can't remember." Kojo smiled gently. "You were the fairest employer I'd ever known. You remembered every employee's name. You visited sick workers personally. You created scholarships for children." As he spoke, Mama Adjoa covered her mouth. The descriptions felt strangely familiar. Faith asked quietly, "Why did you leave the company?" Kojo's expression became serious. "Because I discovered something." "What?" "I was asked to approve documents transferring temporary control of Mensah Holdings after Madame Adjoa disappeared." Faith leaned forward. "And the signatures were forged." Silence filled the office. "I refused." "What happened?" "I was dismissed within a week." Faith immediately understood. "Kwesi." Kojo nodded. He had already begun taking control. The lawyer stood and walked toward an old filing cabinet. "I never expected anyone to come asking about this." He unlocked the drawer. Inside were several folders. One of them bore the words, "Mensah Holdings Investigation." Faith watched as he carefully opened it. "I kept copies." He placed several documents on the desk. Board resolutions, letters, legal notices. Every page carried handwritten notes in the margins. Faith looked at one document. "This signature," Kojo nodded. "Supposedly Madame Adjoa's." "It isn't. You know that. I spent years reviewing documents she signed." He pointed toward several details. "The handwriting is wrong. The pressure is different. The signature was copied. Faith looked stunned. This proves fraud. It proves someone attempted fraud, Kojo corrected gently. In court, we'll still need stronger evidence. Mama Ajawa suddenly spoke. My necklace. Both Faith and Kojo looked at her. The silver star. Kojo froze. You remember it? I think so. She closed her eyes. It belonged to my daughter. Kojo slowly sat down. I remember that necklace. Faith looked between them. You've seen it. Kojo nodded. Many times. Madame Ajawa wore it to every charity event. After her daughter was born, he smiled faintly. She had another one made for the baby. Faith felt chills spread through her body. 2 necklaces. Yes. Matching pieces. Mama Aja suddenly began crying. I remember. My husband commissioned them. The jeweler said. She struggled to continue, and that mother and daughter would always find each other. The memory faded again, but this time it had lasted longer than ever before. Kojo looked at Faith. If we can find that second necklace, he paused. It could become very important. Faith frowned. I've never owned one. Kojo looked thoughtful, perhaps not knowingly. Before anyone could continue, someone knocked sharply on the office door. Kojo frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door slightly. A courier stood outside holding a large envelope. Delivery for Mr. Asare. Kojo accepted it and thanked him. After the courier left, he examined the envelope. There was no return address. He carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Nothing else. He unfolded it. His expression immediately changed. Faith stood. What is it? Without speaking, Kojo handed her the note. Only one sentence had been typed. Stop helping them. This is your final warning. No signature. No explanation. Faith slowly lowered the page. Kojo looked toward the window. They know you've come to me. Outside across the street, a black SUV quietly pulled away from the curb. Faith Mensah stared at the anonymous warning for several long seconds before carefully folding it and placing it inside her backpack. No one in the room spoke. The silence itself carried meaning. Whoever had sent the message knew exactly where Kojo Asare's office was. They knew Faith had come there, and they wanted everyone involved to understand that they were being watched. Kojo closed the office door and locked it. He walked slowly back to his desk. This isn't the first threat I've received. Faith looked up in surprise. You've received others. Kojo nodded. For years. Most arrived anonymously. Some were phone calls. Others were letters. And every one of them carried the same message. Stop asking questions. Faith frowned. Why didn't you report them? Kojo smiled sadly. I did. What happened? Nothing. The answer was short, but painfully honest. He sat down again and looked at the documents spread across his desk. I spent years believing the truth had disappeared forever. He looked toward Mama Ajawa. Seeing you alive changes everything. Mama Ajawa lowered her eyes. I wish I remembered more. Kojo spoke gently. You remember enough. Faith asked quietly, what should we do now? Kojo leaned back in his chair. We need proof that cannot be challenged. The diary is valuable. The hospital tag matters. The forged signatures matter. But none of them alone proves that Faith is Madame Ajawa's daughter. Faith nodded slowly. So what does... Kojo answered without hesitation. A DNA test. The room became quiet again. Faith looked at Mama Ajawa. The elderly woman seemed frightened. What if... She hesitated. What if I'm wrong? Faith immediately took her hand. You've remembered too many things for this to be coincidence. But what if the test says otherwise? Faith smiled softly. Then nothing changes. Mama Adjoa looked confused. Faith continued, I didn't help you because I thought you might be my mother. I helped you because you needed someone. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. So whether we're related or not, Faith squeezed her hand gently. I'll still stay. Kojo watched the exchange silently. For the first time in many years, he felt genuine hope. The bond between these two women had grown far beyond blood. A laboratory report would not create that bond. It would simply reveal what already existed. Kojo picked up his phone. I know someone. A genetic specialist. He's trustworthy. Faith asked, Can we do the test today? Kojo nodded. If we're careful. Less than an hour later, the three of them arrived at a private medical laboratory on the opposite side of Accra. Unlike the crowded government hospitals, the clinic was quiet. Kojo introduced them to Dr. Nana Owusu, a respected genetic specialist. The doctor greeted everyone warmly. I've known Kojo for years. If he trusts you, I do too. Faith briefly explained the situation. She omitted the threats and surveillance. Only the medical facts mattered for the test. Dr. Nana nodded. The procedure is simple. It will only take a few minutes. Mama Adjoa looked nervous. I've never done anything like this. The doctor smiled reassuringly. It's painless. He gently collected cheek swab samples from both women. As he labeled the sealed tubes, he looked toward Kojo. I'll personally supervise everything. Kojo nodded. Thank you. Faith asked the question on everyone's mind. When will the results be ready? The doctor thought for a moment. Normally, several days. But considering the circumstances, I'll make it my priority. You should have the results tomorrow evening. Faith looked relieved. At least they would not have to wait long. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Nana carefully locked the samples inside a secure refrigerator. No one but me has access. Kojo smiled. That's exactly why we came here. Meanwhile, several streets away, a familiar black SUV remained parked outside the laboratory. Inside, the investigator quietly ended a phone call. They've completed the DNA collection. On the other end, Kwesi Owusu remained silent. Finally, he asked, which laboratory? The investigator gave him the name. Kwesi's expression hardened immediately. I know the owner. He ended the call without another word. An hour later, Kwesi walked into a luxurious private club where several influential businessmen were having lunch. Dr. Nana Owusu happened to be among them. Kwesi approached with a polite smile. Doctor. Dr. Nana looked surprised. Mr. Owusu. It's been a long time. The two men exchanged formal greetings before sitting down together. After several minutes of casual conversation, Kwesi finally reached into his briefcase. He removed a sealed envelope. I'd like to ask for a favor. Dr. Nana frowned slightly. What kind of favor? Kwesi slid the envelope across the table. The doctor didn't touch it. I don't understand. It's simply appreciation for making a small adjustment. The doctor's expression immediately changed. What adjustment? A laboratory report. Silence fell between them. Dr. Nana slowly pushed the envelope back across the table. I think you've misunderstood my profession. Kwesi smiled politely. The amount inside should remove any misunderstanding. The doctor stood. I won't even open it. Kwesi's smile disappeared. Think carefully. I already have. Dr. Nana looked directly into his eyes. My license, my reputation, my conscience. They're worth more than whatever is inside that envelope. Several nearby diners turned toward them. Realizing the attention they were attracting, Kwesi quietly collected the envelope. I apologize. There must have been a misunderstanding, Dr. Nana answered firmly. There wasn't. Without another word, he walked away. Kweshi remained seated. His calm expression slowly disappeared. He picked up his phone. The doctor refused. The investigator hesitated. What now? Kweshi stared through the restaurant window. If money doesn't work, he paused. We'll use something else. That evening, Faith and Mama Ajua returned to their small rented room. For the first time in weeks, neither of them spoke much. They simply waited. Waiting had become its own kind of burden. Mama Ajua sat beside the window watching the sunset. Do you think we'll know tomorrow? Faith nodded. I think so. The elderly woman smiled faintly. I've spent 22 years searching without knowing I was searching. She looked toward Faith. If tomorrow tells me you're not my daughter, she paused. I'll still thank God for bringing you into my life. Faith felt tears sting her eyes. She walked over and embraced her. I feel the same way. Later that night, as Faith prepared for bed, she noticed something unusual beneath the door. A folded piece of paper. She carefully picked it up. There was no envelope, only a single handwritten sentence. Do not collect the DNA results if you value your lives. Faith silently read the words twice. She did not show them to Mama Ajua. Instead, she quietly folded the note and placed it beside the anonymous warning Kojo had received earlier. 2 threats. 2 different locations. 1 unmistakable message. Someone was terrified of what tomorrow's laboratory report might reveal. Faith Mensah woke before sunrise. She had barely slept. The anonymous note left beneath the door the previous night remained folded inside her backpack beside the hospital tag, Nurse Akosua's diary, the orphanage note, and the forged corporate documents Kojo Asare had preserved for more than 2 decades. Each piece of evidence had led them to this day. The day they would finally learn whether the connection between Faith and Mama Ajua existed only in their hearts or also in their blood. Faith quietly prepared tea while Mama Ajua sat near the window. The elderly woman seemed unusually calm. You aren't nervous? Faith asked. Mama Ajua smiled gently. I am. But fear won't change the truth. Faith nodded. You've taught me that. The old woman laughed softly. I don't remember teaching anyone. You've been teaching me every day. They left the apartment shortly after sunrise. Kojo Asare was already waiting outside in his car. He stepped out as they approached. I didn't want either of you traveling alone. Faith understood why. Whoever had threatened them knew where the laboratory was. The journey across Accra passed in near silence. Each person remained lost in their own thoughts. Faith thought about the orphanage. Mama Ajua thought about the fragments of memory slowly returning. Kojo thought about the years he had spent waiting for justice. When they finally reached the laboratory, Dr. Nana Owusu met them personally at the entrance. His expression was serious. Come into my office. Faith immediately sensed something unusual. Once the door closed, the doctor looked at all 3 of them. I need to tell you what happened last night. Kojo frowned. What happened? Someone attempted to access the laboratory. Faith's heart skipped. They tried to steal the samples. Dr. Nana nodded. The security alarm was triggered shortly after midnight. Were they successful? No. The samples never left the secure room. Faith released a slow breath. The doctor continued. After that happened, I decided to repeat the analysis myself this morning. Kojo looked relieved. So you're confident? I am. Dr. Nana reached into a locked drawer. He removed a sealed envelope. The room fell completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Faith felt her heartbeat pounding against her chest. The doctor slowly broke the seal. He unfolded the report. His eyes moved across the final page one last time. Then he looked up. His voice became gentle. The probability of maternity, he paused briefly, is 99.9999%. Silence. Complete silence. Faith stared at him without speaking. Mama Adjoa's hands began trembling uncontrollably. Dr. Nana smiled warmly. Faith Mensah. He looked directly at her. Mama Adjoa is your biological mother. The words seemed to stop time itself. Faith looked toward Mama Adjoa. The elderly woman was crying before she even realized tears were falling. My daughter. She whispered the words as though they had been trapped inside her heart for 22 years. Faith slowly knelt before her. Neither woman knew what to say. No speech could ever recover 2 lost decades. Mama Adjoa gently placed both hands on Faith's face. I searched for you. Her voice shook. I never stopped. Faith embraced her tightly. I know. For several minutes, neither of them could stop crying. Kojo quietly looked away, giving them the privacy they deserved. Even Dr. Nana wiped moisture from the corner of his eyes. Finally, Mama Adjoa spoke again. I remember. Everyone looked toward her. More memories had returned. It wasn't an accident. Her breathing became uneven. Kwesi. She whispered the name. Kwesi wanted control of the company. Kojo stepped closer. What do you remember? He convinced my husband to trust him. Mama Adjoa struggled to organize the memories flooding back. After my husband died, I became the majority owner. Some people wanted me to sign documents. I refused. Kojo nodded slowly. I remember that. The elderly woman's voice grew stronger. After Faith was born, they said it wasn't safe for me to keep control. I still refused. She covered her face. Then everything happened so quickly. The hospital. The baby. The lies. Faith held her mother's hand tightly. You don't have to force yourself. Mama Adjoa shook her head. I remember enough. Kojo looked at the laboratory report. This changes everything. Faith looked toward him. What happens now? We go to court. Before anyone could continue, the laboratory receptionist hurried into the office. Mr. Asare, she looked frightened. There are police officers outside. Faith's heart sank. Police? The receptionist nodded. They say they're investigating fraud. Kojo immediately understood. They're here for Faith. The receptionist continued. They have a complaint claiming she manipulated a mentally unstable woman into changing legal documents. Faith looked shocked. I've never signed anything. I know. Kojo stood. This is their final attempt. He walked calmly toward the entrance. Several police officers waited outside. The lead investigator stepped forward. Are you Faith Mensah? Yes. We've received allegations of financial exploitation. Kojo immediately presented his identification. I'm legal counsel. My client will cooperate fully. The officer nodded politely. We only need a statement. Before anyone else could speak, Mama Adjoa stepped forward. For the first time since recovering part of her memory, her posture changed completely. She stood tall. Her voice became firm, clear, confident. I am Adjoa Mensah. Everyone fell silent. The police officers looked confused. Mama Adjoa continued. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Mensah Holdings. I have never transferred authority to anyone willingly. She looked directly at the officers. This young woman is my biological daughter. She gently held Faith's hand, and she has protected me when no one else would. The lead officer looked toward Kojo. He quietly handed over the sealed DNA report. The officer examined it carefully. Then he looked back at Mama Adjoa. Madam, He spoke respectfully. "I believe this matter is far more serious than the complaint we received." Kojo nodded. "It involves corporate fraud, identity concealment, and possible child abduction." The officer immediately contacted his supervisor. Within minutes, several senior investigators arrived. Faith watched everything unfold almost in disbelief. For weeks, they had been treated like fugitives. Now, the truth was finally beginning to receive official attention. Across the city, Kwesi Owusu sat inside his office waiting for news. His phone rang. The investigator sounded panicked. The DNA test confirmed everything. Kwesi closed his eyes. "And the police now have the report. They're reopening the original disappearance investigation." For the first time in 22 years, Kwesi looked genuinely afraid. He slowly lowered the phone. Outside his office window, Accra continued its ordinary rhythm. Employees entered buildings. Children walked home from school. Traffic filled the streets. No one yet knew that the empire he had controlled for more than 2 decades was beginning to collapse. Inside the laboratory, Faith looked at her mother once more. "So?" She smiled through tears. "I finally know where I came from." Mama Ajawa gently kissed her forehead. "And I finally found the daughter I never stopped loving." The morning after the DNA results became official, the story spread across Ghana with astonishing speed. News stations interrupted their regular broadcasts. Radio hosts debated the shocking developments. Online newspapers published headlines about the missing founder of Mensah Holdings, the mysterious disappearance of her infant daughter more than 20 years earlier, and the young orphan who had unknowingly reunited with her own mother through an act of kindness. For Faith Mensah, however, none of those headlines mattered. She sat quietly beside Mama Ajawa in a private room at Dr. Nana's clinic, holding her mother's hand. Neither of them cared about the cameras gathering outside. Neither of them cared about the reporters waiting for interviews. After 22 years apart, they simply wanted time together. Mama Ajawa gently brushed a strand of hair away from Faith's face. "When you were born, you had the same eyes." Faith smiled through tears. "I wish I could remember those days." "So do I." The older woman closed her eyes briefly. "But we still have today." Faith nodded. "And tomorrow." For the first time in her life, the word mother no longer felt like a dream. It felt real. Later that afternoon, Kojo Asare entered the room carrying several folders. His expression was calm but determined. "The investigators have completed the first review." Faith looked up. What did they find? Kojo placed the documents on the table. The forged corporate records. The altered hospital files. The missing birth documents. And financial transfers made shortly after Madame Ajawa disappeared. Mama Ajawa listened quietly. Kojo continued. "The evidence is stronger than we expected." Faith asked, "What about Kwesi?" Kojo looked directly at her. "The police searched his office this morning." Mama Ajawa tightened her grip on Faith's hand. "Did they find anything?" Kojo slowly smiled. "They found far more than anyone imagined." Among the evidence recovered from Kwesi's private safe was a velvet jewelry box. Inside rested a delicate silver necklace shaped like a star. The same necklace Mama Ajawa had remembered placing beside her newborn daughter. When investigators showed it to her later that day, she immediately recognized it. "My husband commissioned these," she whispered. "There were 2. Faith looked confused. 2, Mama Ajawa nodded. "1 for me, 1 for my baby." The police searched the velvet box again. Hidden beneath its lining was a tiny folded receipt from the jeweler, dated 22 years earlier. It clearly described a matching mother and daughter necklace set. Faith quietly reached into her backpack. Since visiting the orphanage, she had carried the faded blanket everywhere. Sister Evelyn had insisted she keep it safe. As she unfolded it once again, something unusual caught her attention. One corner of the blanket felt thicker than the rest. Dr. Nana carefully examined it. There seems to be something stitched inside. Using a small medical scissors, he carefully opened the old seam. A tiny silver pendant slipped onto the table. Everyone stared in silence. It was another star, smaller than the one recovered from Kwesi's safe, but identical in design. Mama Ajua covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "My baby's necklace." Faith gently picked it up. She had unknowingly carried it since infancy. The pendant had remained hidden inside the blanket for 22 years. It had traveled with her from the hospital to the orphanage and through every stage of her difficult childhood. Without realizing it, she had always carried the final piece of her own identity. Several days later, investigators officially arrested Kwesi Owusu. The charges were extensive: corporate fraud, forgery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, kidnapping-related offenses connected to the disappearance of Faith. The investigation also uncovered several accomplices who had helped conceal the truth for years. Some confessed immediately. Others attempted to deny everything until confronted with overwhelming evidence. At the formal hearing, Kwesi finally faced Mama Ajua again after more than 2 decades. The courtroom remained completely silent. Mama Ajua looked at him calmly. She no longer felt hatred, only sadness. "You could have built an honest life," she said quietly. "Instead, you stole someone else's." Kwesi lowered his eyes. For the first time, he had no explanation, no manipulation, no influence, only consequences. The court later ordered that full control of Mensah Holdings be returned to its rightful owner. Many reporters expected Mama Ajua to celebrate her return as one of Ghana's most powerful business leaders. Instead, she made an announcement that surprised everyone. Standing beside Faith, she addressed employees, shareholders, and journalists. "I have recovered something far more valuable than this company." She smiled warmly at her daughter. "I recovered my family." The room erupted into applause. She continued, "Mensah Holdings will continue operating, but from this day forward our greatest investment will not be buildings or profits. It will be people." Within months, the company established the Faith Foundation. The organization provided scholarships for orphan children, medical care for elderly people without families, legal assistance for women facing injustice, and emergency housing for those suddenly left homeless. Faith accepted the role of executive director. Many assumed she would move into a luxurious mansion. Instead, she chose something much simpler. She purchased a modest home in the same neighborhood where she had once rented a tiny room. When reporters asked why, her answer became one of the most shared interviews in the country. "Kindness found me here," she said. "I don't want to forget where it began." Mr. Boadu continued running his bakery. Mrs. Nyarko expanded her tailoring business. Mr. Ofori's laundry became one of the first small businesses supported by the new foundation. Dr. Mensah opened a free medical outreach program with funding from Mensah Holdings. Nurse Akosua was honored publicly for preserving the truth when others remained silent. Sister Evelyn received national recognition for protecting abandoned children for decades. Each person who had chosen honesty over fear saw their lives quietly transformed. One warm Sunday afternoon, Faith and Mama Ajua returned to Hope Children's Home together. Children ran toward them across the courtyard. Faith smiled as she watched them laugh beneath the old mango tree. Years earlier, she had stood in that same place, believing she had no family. Now her mother stood beside her. Mama Ajua slipped the silver star necklace around Faith's neck. Then she placed the matching necklace around her own. The two pendants caught the afternoon sunlight, separated for 22 years, reunited At last. Faith looked at her mother. Do you ever wish those years had never happened? Mama Ajua thought carefully before answering. I wish we had never been separated. She gently touched Faith's cheek. But if we hadn't, I might never have discovered the extraordinary woman my daughter became. Faith smiled through tears. I only became that woman because people chose kindness. Mama Ajua nodded. And kindness led you back to me. Together they walked through the orphanage garden, while children chased bright yellow butterflies beneath the warm Ghanaian sun. This time neither of them was searching anymore. They had finally found home. Life has a remarkable way of rewarding genuine kindness, though rarely in the way we expect. Faith never helped Mama Ajua because she hoped for wealth recognition or a miracle. She shared her last meal because she believed no one should suffer alone. That simple act changed 2 lives forever. This story reminds us that compassion is never wasted. Even when the world misunderstands us, spreads rumors, or seems to reward dishonesty, integrity continues to leave quiet footprints in the lives of others. The people who stood beside Faith during her darkest moments proved that true character is remembered long after false accusations fade away. Family is not only defined by blood, but also by love, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. Yet sometimes when love refuses to give up, even families torn apart by injustice can find each other again. Healing does not erase painful memories, but it gives those memories a new ending filled with hope. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. Your thoughts may encourage someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about courage, justice, forgiveness, and unexpected miracles. If you enjoyed this journey, please like and share it with your family and friends, so more people can discover that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever.